to another peaceful journey through the corridors of time, dear friend. Before we begin tonight's exploration into one of history's most misunderstood civilizations, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If you find comfort and wisdom in these historical bedtime stories, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. It helps more curious souls discover these gentle adventures through time, and it lets me know you're enjoying our nighttime wanderings through the tapestry of human history. Now, settle in comfortably as we drift back through the centuries to witness not savage barbarians, as Hollywood would have us believe, but a complex and sophisticated people whose reality was far more fascinating than their mythology. Close your eyes and let yourself journey to the windswept fjords of Scandinavia, where the truth about the Viking Age awaits discovery. Tonight, I invite you to explore the ultimate historical mystery, separating Viking myth from Viking reality, from horned helmets that never existed to hygienic practices that shocked medieval Europe, from terrifying berserkers to peaceful traders. We'll uncover who the Vikings really were beneath centuries of legend and propaganda. Let me guide you through this remarkable journey of discovery, feeling the weight of truth itself as we explore how a people who lived over 1,000 years ago continue to capture our imagination today. The world of the Vikings has been shrouded in misconceptions for centuries, painted by Hollywood fantasies, romantic nationalism, and the propaganda of those they conquered. But recent archaeological discoveries, DNA analysis, and careful historical research have revealed a reality far more complex and fascinating than any myth. The truth about the Vikings is not a story of savage barbarians, but of sophisticated seafarers, innovative engineers, meticulous business people, and surprisingly progressive societies that helped shape the modern world. Our journey begins with perhaps the most persistent myth of all, the horned helmet. Every depiction of Vikings, from Wagner's operas to Marvel's Thor, shows these legendary warriors crowned with terrifying horned helmets. The image is so iconic that it seems impossible to imagine Vikings without them. Yet, archaeological evidence tells a completely different story. In over a century of excavations across Scandinavia, not a single Viking helmet with horns has ever been discovered. The few Viking helmets that have been found are simple, practical affairs made of iron or leather, designed for protection rather than intimidation. This myth was born in the 19th century, specifically in the 1870s, when German composer Richard Wagner commissioned costumes for his Ring Cycle operas. The costume designer thought horned helmets looked dramatic and memorable, creating one of history's most enduring misconceptions. The reality is that horned helmets would have been completely impractical in battle, providing handholds for enemies and compromising the wearer's safety. The Vikings were far too practical and experienced as warriors to adopt such dangerous headgear. But if Vikings didn't wear horned helmets, what did they actually look like? Recent DNA analysis has shattered another common misconception about Viking appearance. The largest ever study of Viking DNA, analyzing 442 skeletons from over 80 Viking sites across northern Europe and Greenland, revealed that dark hair and eyes were far more common among Scandinavians of the Viking Age than they are today. The stereotypical image of the tall, blonde, blue-eyed Viking warrior is largely a modern invention, not historical reality. Even more surprising, the genetic evidence shows that Vikings were not restricted to genetically pure Scandinavians, but were a diverse group of peoples with diverse ancestry. Just prior to and during the Viking Age, genes flowed into Scandinavia from people arriving from Eastern and Southern Europe, and even from Western Asia. Some individuals who were buried with Viking grave goods and in traditional Viking style were determined to be genetically linked to the Picts of Scotland and contemporaneous inhabitants of Ireland. In other words, being Viking was more about cultural identity and lifestyle than ethnic origin. The very term Viking itself is widely misunderstood. Contrary to popular belief, Viking does not refer to a people, but rather to an activity. In the Old Norse language, to go Viking meant to go on a raiding expedition or trading voyage. Most inhabitants of medieval Scandinavia were engaged in fishing, farming, trade, and crafts. Viking raids were typically something young men might do to gain honor and wealth, before settling down to more conventional lives. It was rare for any man to participate in foreign raids continuously throughout his life. This brings us to another crucial myth, that Vikings were primarily raiders and warriors. While raiding was certainly an important aspect of Viking culture, it was only one part of a much more complex society. Many Vikings were traders who peacefully conducted business in foreign lands, settlers who opened up new territories, or craftsmen who created beautiful jewelry, weapons, and art. The Vikings established extensive trade networks that stretched from Greenland to Constantinople, from Iceland to the Middle East. They were skilled navigators, innovative shipbuilders, and shrewd merchants who understood that trade generated more sustainable wealth than writing. Archaeological evidence reveals a society far more sophisticated than the barbaric image suggests. Viking settlements were well-planned communities with specialized craftsmen, complex legal systems, and surprisingly advanced hygiene practices. The Vikings were actually cleaner than most of their European contemporaries, a fact that caused considerable friction with their neighbors. Medieval chroniclers complained that Vikings bathed weekly, combed their hair daily, and frequently changed their clothes, making them dangerously attractive to local women. John of Wallingford, a Benedictine monk, lamented in his chronicle that Danish Vikings were able to seduce English women because of their grooming habits. He wrote that the Danes, thanks to their habit of combing their hair every day, of bathing every Saturday and regularly changing their clothes, were able to undermine the virtue of married women and even seduce the daughters of nobles to be their mistresses. The Vikings even had a special day for bathing. Saturday was called Lagardar, meaning washing day, a tradition that continues in Scandinavian languages today. Viking hygiene practices were remarkably advanced for that time. Archaeological excavations have uncovered various hygiene tools, including combs made from bone or antler, tweezers, ear cleaners, and even toothpicks. These items were found in abundance across different archaeological sites, indicating that grooming was widespread across all levels of society, not just limited to the wealthy elite. Vikings used natural soaps made from animal fats and wood ash, and they valued personal cleanliness to such a degree that combs were often carried in special leather pouches attached to belts. The contrast with contemporary European hygiene practices was stark. While the Arab traveler Ibn Fadlan criticized Vikings for sharing washing water among multiple people, he was comparing them to Islamic standards of ritual purity that required washing 5 times daily. By European medieval standards, Vikings were exceptionally clean. Their commitment to personal hygiene was so unusual that it became a source of cultural conflict, with English chroniclers expressing both admiration and concern about Viking cleanliness habits. This attention to appearance and cleanliness reflects a broader Viking value system that emphasized personal honor and social reputation. Viking society was built around concepts of honor, hospitality, and proper behavior that were codified in poems like the Havamel, which contained practical advice for daily life. These weren't bloodthirsty savages, but people who valued wisdom, friendship, and appropriate conduct in social situations. The structure of Viking society was far more complex than popular culture suggests. Rather than being a chaotic warrior culture, Viking communities were organized into clear social hierarchies with sophisticated legal systems. Society was divided into 3 main classes: thralls, slaves, carls, free farmers, and jarls, nobles. This social structure was described in the Eddic poem Rigsjula and has been confirmed by archaeological evidence. Free Viking men participated in assemblies called things, which were democratic institutions where laws were made, disputes settled, and important decisions debated. These assemblies represent some of Europe's earliest experiments in democratic governance. The Althing in Iceland, established in 930 CE, is considered the world's oldest surviving parliament. Viking legal traditions emphasized collective decision-making and the rule of law rather than arbitrary authority. Perhaps most surprisingly for modern audiences, Viking women enjoyed considerably more rights and freedoms than their counterparts elsewhere in medieval Europe. While Viking society was still patriarchal and women faced significant restrictions, they had legal rights that would not be matched in most European societies for centuries. Viking women could own property, initiate divorce, serve as priestesses, and even act as rulers when circumstances required. Women in Viking society managed household finances, ran farms in their husband's absence, and could become wealthy landowners as widows. The law protected women from unwanted attention and sexual violence. Divorce was available to both men and women, though it was often easier for women to obtain than in other medieval societies. While women could not serve as chieftains, judges, or speak at assemblies, they wielded considerable informal power through their economic roles and social influence. The archaeological record reveals that some Viking women were buried with weapons, leading to speculation about female warriors or shield maidens. While the historical evidence for widespread female participation in warfare remains limited, there are documented cases of women taking up arms to defend their homes or communities. The sagas mention several prominent women who led military expeditions or ruled territories in their own right. Viking religious beliefs were far more complex and nuanced than the stereotypical image of bloodthirsty warriors seeking death in battle. While Odin and Thor were indeed important deities, the Norse pantheon included dozens of gods and goddesses governing everything from agriculture to wisdom to justice. Thor, in particular, was popular not because he represented mindless violence, but because he was seen as a protector of ordinary people, a defender of order against chaos. The concept of Valhalla, where warriors who died in battle would feast until the end of days, represented only one of several possible afterlives in Norse mythology. Vikings also believed in Folkvamra, another hall for worthy dead, and various other destinations depending on how one lived and died. The emphasis on dying bravely in battle was balanced by equally important values of wisdom, hospitality, honor, and proper conduct in daily life. Viking religious practices emphasized personal relationships with the divine rather than organized institutional worship. They practiced divination, made offerings at sacred sites, and participated in seasonal festivals that marked the agricultural year. When Christianity began spreading through Scandinavia, many Vikings adopted Christian symbols alongside traditional Norse ones, creating syncretic religious practices that blended both traditions. The Berserkers, those legendary warriors who fought in a trance-like fury, represent another area where myth and reality diverge significantly. While Berserkers certainly existed, they were not the uncontrollable madmen often depicted in popular culture. Archaeological and literary evidence suggests that Berserkers were skilled warriors who used psychological warfare techniques to intimidate enemies. The famous Berserker rage was likely a controlled state that warriors entered before battle, not an uncontrollable frenzy. The shield-biting and howling described in historical sources were deliberately provocative acts performed before combat began, designed to frighten opponents and pump up the Berserkers' own adrenaline. Once battle was joined, Berserkers fought as disciplined members of organized military units, not as wild individuals running amok across the battlefield. Some scholars suggest that Berserker behavior may have been induced by consuming certain mushrooms or other substances, while others believe it was a form of psychological conditioning similar to techniques used by modern special forces. What seems certain is that Berserkers were elite warriors who combined genuine fighting skill with effective psychological warfare, not the out-of-control savages of popular imagination. Viking military tactics were sophisticated and well-coordinated, emphasizing mobility, surprise, and psychological impact. Their longships were technological marvels that gave them unprecedented strategic advantages. These vessels could navigate both open oceans and shallow rivers, could be carried overland between waterways, and could be beached directly on shores for rapid deployment of troops. The combination of speed, maneuverability, and seaworthiness made Viking longships the most advanced military vessels of their time. The construction of these ships represented centuries of naval innovation. Viking shipbuilders used a clinker construction technique, where overlapping planks were nailed to a central keel, creating vessels that were both flexible and strong. The ships were designed to flex with ocean swells rather than fight them, allowing them to survive storms that would destroy more rigid vessels. Modern replicas of Viking longships have achieved speeds of up to 14 knots, demonstrating the effectiveness of their design. But Vikings were not just warriors and raiders. They were also among the most accomplished explorers and traders of the medieval world. 5 centuries before Columbus, Leif Erikson and other Viking explorers had reached North America, establishing settlements in what they called Vinland. Archaeological evidence from Lanceau Meadows in Newfoundland confirms that Vikings successfully colonized parts of North America around 1000 CE. The scope of Viking exploration was remarkable. They sailed west to Iceland, Greenland, and North America, east along Russian rivers to the Black Sea and Constantinople, south to the Mediterranean and North Africa. Everywhere they went, they established trading relationships, founded settlements, and created networks of communication and commerce that connected previously isolated regions. Viking trading networks were among the most extensive of the medieval period. They traded furs, amber, and walrus ivory from the north for silver, silk, and spices from the south. Viking merchants established permanent trading posts in cities like Kiev, Novgorod, and Constantinople. They developed standardized weights and measures, used silver as a common currency, and created the first truly international trading system in post-Roman Europe. The goods that moved through Viking trading networks reveal the sophistication of their commercial relationships. From Scandinavia, they exported iron weapons and tools, woolen textiles, furs, amber, and unfortunately, slaves captured in raids. In return, they imported silver coins from the Islamic world, silk from China, spices from India, wine from France, and luxury goods from across the known world. Archaeological finds show that Viking traders reached as far as Central Asia and the Middle East, participating in trade networks that stretched across continents. This commercial success required sophisticated financial and legal systems. Vikings developed complex contracts for trading partnerships, established insurance systems for maritime ventures, and created legal frameworks for resolving commercial disputes. The success of Viking merchants depended not on violence, but on reputation, reliability, and fair dealing. This is hardly the image of savage barbarians that popular culture promotes. Recent archaeological research has revealed surprising details about Viking health and diet that further contradict stereotypical images. While Vikings certainly faced health challenges, they were not the crude, poorly nourished warriors of popular imagination. Analysis of Viking era remains shows a diverse diet that included meat from livestock, fish from coastal waters and rivers, dairy products, grains, vegetables, and wild fruits and berries. Viking cooking techniques were sophisticated, using a variety of tools and methods, including roasting, boiling, baking, and smoking. They used iron and soapstone cookware, had specialized tools for food preparation, and even used heated stones as a form of sous vide cooking for vessels that couldn't be placed directly over fire. Their diet was nutritionally well-balanced by medieval standards, though like all pre-modern peoples, they suffered from various diseases and health problems. Recent CT scans of Viking skulls have revealed widespread dental problems, sinus infections, and other health issues that would have caused significant pain and suffering in an era before modern medicine. 80% of examined Viking remains showed evidence of tooth root infections, often so severe that infection had broken through bone into sinus cavities. Many Vikings suffered from chronic sinusitis, ear infections, and joint problems that would have reduced their quality of life considerably. These health challenges remind us that Vikings were human beings who faced the same biological limitations as all pre-modern peoples. The image of superhuman warriors is as mythical as their horned helmets. Vikings dealt with toothaches, sinus headaches, and chronic pain just like everyone else, but without access to antibiotics, painkillers, or modern medical care. Viking burial customs reflect the complexity and diversity of their society. While ship burials and cremations on funeral pyres capture popular imagination, these elaborate ceremonies were reserved for the wealthy elite. Most Vikings were buried in simple graves with modest grave goods, reflecting their social status and personal beliefs. The variation in burial practices across different regions and time periods shows how Viking culture adapted to local conditions and changing religious beliefs. The famous ship burials, like the Oseberg ship in Norway, provide valuable insights into Viking beliefs about the afterlife and social hierarchy. These elaborate ceremonies involved placing the deceased in a ship along with weapons, jewelry, household goods, and sometimes sacrificed animals or slaves. The ship was then either buried under a large mound or set ablaze and pushed out to sea, symbolizing the journey to the afterlife. But such elaborate burials were exceptional events for the most prominent members of society. Ordinary Vikings were more likely to be buried in simple graves with a few personal possessions, or cremated with their ashes placed in urns. The conversion to Christianity during the 10th and 11th centuries gradually changed burial practices, with traditional cremation being replaced by Christian burial customs. The timeline of the Viking Age itself reveals how this period represented a specific historical moment rather than an eternal way of life. The Viking Age is traditionally dated from 793 CE, when Vikings raided the monastery at Lindisfarne, to 1066 CE, when Harald Hardrada died at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. This period of roughly 275 years saw the rapid expansion of Scandinavian influence across Europe and beyond. But it was followed by the gradual integration of Scandinavian societies into the broader European Christian world. The end of the Viking Age was not marked by military defeat, but by cultural transformation. As Scandinavian kingdoms centralized power, adopted Christianity, and developed more complex state institutions, the opportunities for independent raiding and trading expeditions decreased. Young men who might once have gone Viking found opportunities in service to kings, in the church, or in increasingly sophisticated commercial enterprises. The Viking legacy extends far beyond their reputation as raiders and warriors. Their innovations in shipbuilding influenced naval design for centuries. Their democratic institutions provided models for later parliamentary systems. Their trading networks helped connect Europe with markets across the known world. Their legal traditions contributed to the development of common law systems. Their literature, preserved in the Icelandic sagas, created some of the world's greatest storytelling traditions. Modern genetic research continues to reveal the extent of Viking influence on European populations. The Vikings left genetic markers across Europe, from Scotland to Ukraine, from Iceland to Italy. Recent studies have even found that Viking DNA carries important information about the evolution of disease resistance, including mutations that provide protection against HIV. The Vikings were not just historical actors but genetic ancestors, whose biological legacy continues to influence modern populations. The transformation of Viking image from historical reality to popular myth reveals how societies reconstruct the past to serve present needs. The 19th century Romantic movement, which gave us horned helmets and noble savages, was seeking alternatives to industrial modernity. The 20th century fascination with Viking warriors reflected anxieties about masculinity and national identity. Contemporary interest in Viking exploration and trading reflects our globalized world's appreciation for cultural exchange and international commerce. Archaeological discoveries continue to refine our understanding of Viking society. Recent excavations have uncovered evidence of Viking settlements in previously unknown locations, revealed new details about their daily lives, and provided insights into their relationships with other cultures. Advanced scientific techniques, including DNA analysis, isotope studies, and digital reconstruction, are allowing researchers to extract information from archaeological remains that would have been impossible to obtain just a few decades ago. The study of Viking history demonstrates the importance of evidence-based historical research over popular mythology. While myths and legends have their place in culture and entertainment, they should not be confused with historical reality. The real Vikings were far more interesting than their mythical counterparts. They were practical, innovative, socially complex people who created one of medieval Europe's most dynamic civilizations. Perhaps the most important lesson from Viking history is that human societies are always more complex than they appear from the outside. The people who seemed like savage barbarians to their enemies were actually sophisticated traders, skilled craftsmen, innovative lawmakers, and caring family members to themselves. They faced the same fundamental human challenges as all peoples: how to make a living, how to raise children, how to create meaning and beauty in life, how to deal with conflict and cooperation. The Vikings succeeded because they were adaptable. They combined maritime technology with commercial innovation, military effectiveness with diplomatic skill, respect for tradition with openness to new ideas. When circumstances changed, they changed with them, eventually transforming from raiders and traders into the peaceful, prosperous societies of modern Scandinavia. Their story reminds us that historical change is driven not by mythical heroes or stereotypical villains, but by ordinary people responding to extraordinary circumstances. The Vikings were not supernatural warriors, but men and women who maximized their opportunities while dealing with the constraints of their time and place. They remind us that human potential can emerge from the most unlikely circumstances, and that the future is always more open than it appears to those living through historical change. The persistence of Viking myths in popular culture reflects our continued fascination with this remarkable people. But it also shows how easily historical truth can be overshadowed by dramatic fiction. The real Vikings were not the horned helmet-wearing savages of Hollywood movies, but complex human beings whose innovations, adaptations, and achievements continue to influence our world more than 1,000 years after their supposed age ended. As you drift towards sleep tonight, remember that the Vikings' greatest legacy is not their reputation for violence, but their demonstration of human adaptability and innovation. They showed that isolated societies can suddenly explode onto the world stage, that traditional ways of life can evolve rapidly when circumstances change, and that the boundaries between civilization and barbarism are often more fluid than we might expect. The thunder of Viking longships no longer echoes across northern seas, but their spirit of exploration, their commitment to practical solutions, and their ability to balance individual achievement with community cooperation continue to inspire us. In our modern globalized world, we are all Vikings now, navigating unknown waters between familiar shores, seeking opportunities beyond the horizon while maintaining connections to home. The myths surrounding the Vikings served their purpose in entertaining and inspiring subsequent generations, but the reality of Viking life offers more valuable lessons for our own time. They remind us that historical stereotypes often obscure more than they reveal, that human societies are always more complex than they appear to outsiders, and that the most important historical changes often come from ordinary people responding creatively to extraordinary challenges. Sweet dreams, and remember that the Viking legacy lives on, not in the mythical images of popular culture, but in the documented achievements of historical research. Their story teaches us that truth is always more fascinating than fiction, that human beings are capable of remarkable adaptation and innovation, and that the most enduring influences come not from conquest and violence, but from trade, exploration, law, and the patient work of building civilizations that can adapt and evolve across the centuries. May their example inspire your own journeys beyond familiar horizons, and may their memory remind you that the greatest adventures come not from seeking to dominate others, but from learning to understand the complex realities that lie beneath the surface of every human story. The Vikings teach us that history's most important lessons come not from myths and legends, but from the careful study of evidence, the patient work of understanding, and the recognition that our ancestors were neither gods nor devils, but human beings like ourselves, doing their best to create meaningful lives in challenging times.